Hello and welcome to this ISM Trust webinar on flexible working for parents and carers in music. I'm Ruth McPherson, Head of Charity Development at the ISM. To describe myself, I'm a white woman with light brown hair and I'm wearing a headset and the ISM Trust logo is behind me. I'm delighted to be joined by the ISM's Director of Legal Services, Stuart Dark, and founders of national charity Parents and Carers in Performing Arts, Cassie Rain and Anna Enold Danailov. After graduating from the London School of Economics with a degree in government and economics, Stuart went on to train as a barrister. He has worked as a civil servant and as an official for a teachers' trade union before he joined the ISM in September 2021. And Cassie and Anna founded PiPA, or Parents and Carers in the Performing Arts, in 2015. PiPA works strategically with a collaborative network of over 70 organisations, industry bodies and unions across music, theatre, dance and opera, promoting best practice employment and support for parents and carers in the industry through data collection, research, advocacy and implementing strategies for change. Before we begin this webinar, just a few things to note. During the presentations, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function, and we'll do our best to answer these at the end. And do keep an eye on the chat box where we'll be dropping in some useful links, and we'll also be encouraging you to interact and comment on some of the webinar content later on. If you experience any technical difficulties, please let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve them. And if you wish to use them, subtitles are available to enable at the bottom of your screen. The webinar is being recorded and we'll share the recording with you afterwards, as well as a feedback survey, which we'd be very grateful if you'd fill out. It helps us to improve our services. A little bit about the ISM Trust. So the ISM Trust is the ISM's sister charity, which offers high quality professional development to everyone working in music. Through the ISM Trust, the ISM gives back to the music sector and supports and empowers music professionals to succeed in the industry. We produce award-winning events, training and resources, which are largely completely free to access. So please do consider supporting the work of the ISM Trust if you can by becoming a friend of the Trust, making a donation or leaving a legacy. Any support that you can offer us is really appreciated and goes to help your fellow music professionals succeed in the music sector. Now, with no further ado, I'm very pleased to hand over to Stuart Dark, who is going to help us to understand more about the legal regulations of the new Day One Right to Flexible Working law. So thank you, and over to you, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Ruth, and good afternoon, everyone. I am going to share my screen, so hopefully you can see my presentation. You should be able to see that now, and I'm sure that if you can't, Ruth will tell me, or someone else will tell me that you can't see it. So, afternoon, everybody. My name's Stuart Dark. I'm the Director of Legal Services at the ISM. To describe myself, I'm a white male with grey hair and glasses. I've got a blue shirt on with a blue tie, and behind me, like Ruth, is the ISM Trust logo. And I'm really delighted to be here this afternoon, along with Cassie and Anna from PiPA, to talk to you about flexible working requests and the new Day One rights that are coming into force in April this year. What I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about the legal aspects of those changes that are coming into force from the 6th of April. These are some pretty important changes and are giving all employees some more rights in terms of flexible working. I'm also going to talk about what an employer should do in responding to a flexible working request. And I'll also talk about what to do if a flexible request is turned down, and put a seed in your mind as well that whilst the statutory process exists, there's always the possibility that informal arrangements can be made as well. So first of all, I wanted to give you some history about flexible working requests, just to give you a bit of background. There's been a statutory right for employees to request flexible working since 2003. At that point in time, it was quite limited in nature, and it was just limited to carers of children under the age of 6 or disabled children under the age of 18. And when it was first introduced, there was a fairly lengthy procedure, which was set out in regulations detailing how an employer had to deal with applications, and the meetings that they had to hold, or the meeting that they had to hold with the employee who had requested flexible working. These regulations also included timeframes with which the employer had to comply. At the time, it was generally unpopular with employers, the new right to request flexible working. It was particularly seen as bureaucratic, and it was felt by some employers that a large number of employees would apply and that it would be difficult to refuse a request. I have to say those fears weren't and never have been substantiated when you look at the number of requests and the number of requests granted. And then over the course of the following years, there were some subsequent changes to the legislation. In 2009, the right to request flexible working was extended to all of those responsible for caring for children up to and including the age of 16. And then 5 years later, in 2014, that right was extended to all employees who had at least 26 weeks of continuous service with that employer. And at that point in time, you no longer had to be a carer for children to have the right to make the request, and it was extended out to all employees, not depending on the reason for asking. So the current situation, this is the situation in place at the moment prior to April, prior to the changes in April. And I always want to stress when I talk about flexible working that it's the legal right is just a right to request flexible working. It's not a right to flexible working. So an employer doesn't necessarily have to grant that request, but you have, if you are an employee, the right to make the request. The statutory right is only open, unfortunately, in the legislation to employees. And that is an individual who has entered into or works under or worked under a contract of employment. Now, this can be a complicated area of law in terms of determining employment status. But if you're genuinely self-employed or indeed a worker in the eyes of the law, then you don't have this legal right, unfortunately. So you don't have the right in law to make the request. If you are an employee, though, at the moment, you must have 26 weeks continuous service with that employer. Now, what counts towards that can be previous service with an employer or a different employer if there was a transfer of undertakings, or if they were an associated employer, but you have to have 26 weeks continuous service. Any request must be in writing, and an employee can make a request to change the hours that they work, a change to the times when they are required to work, so that could be on the particular days, and they can also make a request to change their place of work, so work at home rather than in an office, for example. At the moment, the employer has a 3-month period to consider the request and make a decision, and that includes any appeal process as well. And the only duty at the moment on the employer is to deal with requests in a reasonable manner. There is no requirement, as it currently stands, to meet with the employee, but that is changing. A refusal to grant flexible working must be for one of the 8 reasons which are listed in the legislation, but these are quite wide-ranging. So these 8 reasons are the burden of additional costs to the employer, if it's too great, if it would have a detrimental effect on the employer's ability to meet customer demand, an inability to reorganize work among existing staff, an inability to recruit additional staff, a detrimental impact on quality or a detrimental impact on performance, an insufficiency of work during the periods the employee proposes to work, and then if the employer is planning any structural changes, that can be a reason for refusal. And as it stands at the moment, the employees can only make one request in any 12-month period. But all of that is changing in the next few weeks. So from the 6th of April 2024, there are things which are changing. It continues to be a right to request flexible working, but instead of requiring 26 weeks of continuous service, it will be a day one right rather than, as I say, having to have 26 weeks continuous service. So the first day that you work, that you're employed somewhere, you have a right to make this, make a request for flexible working. There continue to be no restrictions on who can make a request, and it's open to all employees for any reason. So that could be a reason related to caring for other people, whether it be a child or an adult, but it could be a dependent or somebody else, or indeed it could be to undertake, for example, a course of study and use the time through flexible working to do some professional development or do some outside development. It can be for any reason. You continue to have to make the request in writing after the 6th of April, but the significant change here is that an applicant, the employee, no longer has to explain the effect on the employer and to tell the employer how they can deal with the changes that the employee has asked for. So they no longer do you have to give great details around what the effect may be or how to deal with it. And this is a significant change for employees, lessens the burden on employees. In addition, the decision period is being reduced to 2 months rather than 3. And as before, this can be extended, but only by agreement between the parties. Unless the employer is going to agree the written request in full, then they must meet with the employee who is making the request. So you remember before, the situation at the moment is you don't have to meet, there doesn't have to be a meeting. After the 6th of April, if the employer is going to turn down the request, then there must be a meeting. The 8 reasons for refusal, which I explained on the previous slide, remain in place and they don't change. But what has changed as well is the number of applications that a person can make, and this is increasing to 2 applications in any 12-month period. But an employee can only have 1 live application at any time. So not multiple applications at the same time, but 2 in any 12-month period. The other thing I was going to say was that you must remember as well as an employee, if you're an employee, that the request, if granted, changes your contract of employment. It can do so on a permanent basis. And that means that if you want to revert to a previous working arrangement, then you would need to request this and negotiate with your employer and talk to them about it. It is possible to make changes on a temporary basis, but this would need to be specified in any request that you were making, that any request an employee is making. So it's a permanent change to terms and conditions of employment, potentially. So what should employee do if they want to make a request? Well, first of all, make sure you're an employee. If you aren't sure, then you can take advice from somebody. If you're an ISM member, then come and speak to the ISM legal team. You should check all the documentation that you may have received when you started working for an organisation. Look at what that says. Contracts of employment normally are fairly clear, but if you have some doubts, come and take some advice, or take some advice. You must put the request in writing, and I would always include the date that you're making the request, as this is when the decision period starts, especially if you give the request to your employer on the same day. So if you deliver it by hand or email it to them, make sure that you've got the date in the request that you're making. You should include the change being requested. Now, as I said, you no longer from the 6th of April have to go into great explanations about it, but you should include the change to your hours that you're requesting, or the change to the days that you're requesting, or the change to your place of work. So the employer is clear about what you're asking for. You should also specify the date for when you want the change to come into effect, and any dates of previous requests. And I would always say, if it's your first request, then I would always make that clear. Finally, don't make a request after the 6th of April if the employer has not decided on a previous request you have made. Remember, you can't have 2 live applications, so you'll need to wait until the employer has made a final decision, and then, and that's including any appeal, and then make another application, as long as you're not making more than 2 applications in a 12-month period. If you're an employer, or what should your employer be thinking about when they get a flexible working request? Well, the general rule or the legislative requirement is that the employer acts reasonably, but there's no statutory definition of what this means. But it would be good to have, it's always good to have a look at the ACAS code of practice or the government guidance on this. And I think those links will be put in the chat at some point in time. For example, gov.uk says examples of acting reasonably include assessing the advantages and disadvantages of the application, holding a meeting to discuss the request with the employee, and offering an appeal process. So they're all the things which I'm starting to talk about on this slide. Employers should only turn down a request if there's a genuine business reason, as outlined in the legislation and highlighted earlier on in this presentation. It should only be for one of those 8 grounds. And when an employer makes that decision, they must make sure that they don't discriminate on the grounds of a protected characteristics. And remember, these are age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex, or sexual orientation. So an employer should make sure that they're treating people equally. So they should look about how other decisions, or look at other decisions that have been made, and making sure that they've not got provision, criteria or policies which disadvantage any particular group. It's always good practice, I would say, even if there wasn't a statutory obligation, but it's always good practice to hold a meeting with the employee and allow them to bring a work colleague or a trade union or a professional association rep with them to that meeting. Once a decision is made, tell the employee in writing what that decision is, explain the decision and what business reason you're citing if you're turning down the request. Employers should always allow an appeal, and this should be an appeal to a different decision maker. Often I'd suggest it be someone more senior in an organisation, or someone maybe on the board of trustees if it was a charity, or the governing body of whatever organisation. And what the employer has to do is they have to make sure that they're completing this within the 2 months time period, and that includes the appeal. The only way you can extend that is by agreement between the parties. What could happen then if a request is turned down? Well, if a request is turned down, then a person can make a claim to an employment tribunal for one of the reasons that I'm outlining on the slide. An employee would have to go through ACAS early conciliation first, and any claim must be submitted within 3 months of the request being turned down. This is a really strict deadline for making a claim, so it's important to take advice on it if you do have a request turned down. Again, ISM members can do this through the ISM legal team. But if you don't want to make a claim, or perhaps you haven't got a claim that you can make, remember that the advantage now is that you can make another application, one more application in the same 12-month period. So do think about whether you can put in another application if one gets turned down, and use the experience and use the what information you were given from the first application to make a better application or a slightly different application in the second instance. And then finally, the final slide I was going to talk about was just to plant this seed in your mind. And I'm not going to say very much here, but because it will come up later, I think. But just wanted to remind everyone that the law says what must be done. So it tells employees the rights they have, and it tells employers what they have to do. But it's always open to employers and those engaging other types of staff, so whether that be self-employed people or workers, it's open to those organisations to go beyond statutory obligations. Things can be done through agreement, and there are lots of benefits to flexible working, which are going to be covered later on as well. So employers should think about all of those things as well as thinking about the statutory process. That's the final slide of my presentation. And what we've got for you in the next short part of this webinar is Cassie and I are going to run through a couple of scenarios for you. And Cassie's joined us. So Cassie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Cassie Rain. I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Parents and Carers in Performing Arts. I am a white woman in my 40s. I've got my hair tied back today, wearing a blue blazer and a white shirt with gold earrings. It's lovely to be here.
Thanks, Cassie. Well, what we're going to do this afternoon in this next session is Cassie and I are going to act out 2 scenarios for you. And what we want to do is we want you to imagine that you are accompanying the person making a flexible working request to a meeting with their manager. What we would like you to do is think about whether the employer is dealing with the application properly and in line with how they should act and what I've just described. We also want you to think about the consequences of the employer acting in the way that they are. I'll let you into a secret now. One of the employers here is going to be good and one of them is going to be not so good. And so what we'd like you to do is please have a guess at which one you think is the good and which ones you think maybe is the not so good, the bad, and put any comments that you have in the chat, and then we can run through them at the end. And before each scene, Cassie and I will tell you who we are playing, the roles we're playing, but please imagine both meetings being conducted over Zoom. So let's show you the first scene. So in this first scene, I'm going to play an employee who is a musician in an orchestra, and they've been with the orchestra for 3 months.
I'm going to be playing an employer. I am the orchestra manager. I've been the orchestra manager for the past 10 years. I've got a lot on my plate and I'm really busy and trying to manage my team.
Okay.
Right, let's go. So Stuart, hi. Right, let's get this over with. Honestly, I am a big fan of flexible working, but it's just not appropriate for an orchestra member, is it? I can't alter the whole orchestra hours to suit you. I'm really sorry. It's not possible.
Well, I wouldn't say it's inappropriate, Cassie. It would simply allow me to balance my work life with my family commitments. You know that my baby's a year old now, and I want to share caring responsibilities with my wife. She's going back to work, and so I need to be available to help care for our son.
I appreciate it might be difficult, um, but we have a schedule of performances, and you have to attend them all. That's the contract you've agreed to. I can't give you special treatment.
I'm not asking for special treatment, just a slight adjustment that would allow me to continue excelling in my role while fulfilling my role as a father. I'm just asking that I'm used for 20 performances instead of 30 over the course of the year, and that I don't perform or rehearse on a Thursday.
Look, Stuart, you're part of a wider team here. If you're not here for all the performances, and if you can't be available on a Thursday, it just creates a huge strain for everybody else. I can't afford to lose you on a Thursday for 1 week, let alone a whole week.
Well, I propose solutions to address that. See, look, Ruth is someone that I went to conservatoire with, and she's an excellent viola player, and she's available for all of the performances that I'd miss.
I've got so much on my plate right now. I don't have the time, I don't have the energy to deal with the additional workload it would create. I mean, you've also not been with us for very long, just 3 months. And besides, what message does that send to the rest of the team? They'll all be lining up their own flexible working requests, and then no one would be here at the same time. It'd be a nightmare.
I don't believe this is about special treatment, Cassie. It's about finding reasonable solutions that benefit both me and the orchestra. I'm confident that with some adjustments we can make this work. You made it work when Ella came back from maternity leave, so I don't see why we can't make it work for me as well.
Stuart, I appreciate your dedication, but my answer is no. This request is simply not feasible. I need you for all of the performances and definitely on a Thursday. That's the end of the discussion.
Look, Cassie, I believe my request, you refusing my request without considering the proposed solutions might be considered unreasonable under the statutory right to request flexible working. I'm really disappointed with your decision, and I'd like to formally appeal it.
I'm afraid in this case, it just wouldn't be considered as a reasonable or possible adjustment to make. The answer will remain the same. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a lot of work to do.
Okay, that's the end of our first scenario. So have a think about that, colleagues, and put in the chat what you think about it, whether you think that was maybe the good or the bad employer. Let's move on to the second one.
I am playing an employee. I'm a music teacher in a school. I've only just joined the school and I have a daughter.
And in this scene, I'm going to be the director of music in the school. So I'm going to be acting as the employer. And I've been at the school for 2 years now.
Thanks for making the time to meet, Stuart.
Of course, Cassie, I got your letter setting out your flexible working request. Do you want to give me a bit more detail about it?
As you know, I've been working here for just over a month now, and I'm really enjoying the role and the team. However, I want to formally request a change to my working hours under the statutory right to request flexible working. My daughter is now 4, and I want some additional time to ensure that I can take her to school and pick her up every day.
I see. Can you tell me a bit more what you have in mind?
I'd like to request to arrive at school at 9:30 on the days that I work and leave at 2:30. I would like to work on a Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday every week, rather than a Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. This would come into effect from September this year. This is my first flexible working request.
I understand. I know you don't have to explain the impact of the request, but it would be good to know your reasoning.
Well, I know that it takes me about 30 minutes to get from my daughter's school to here. Music lessons never start before 9:30 as is normally form time. I think we can still fit in all the lessons, even if the last one finishes at 2:30. I know I also want to change my days, but there's always disruption on a Friday due to the focus on sports activities in the afternoon. So I'm finding that lots of music lessons get cancelled anyway and they have to be rearranged. I understand that this request involves a change for the department, but I believe I can still fully meet my work commitments and responsibilities within the different working hours.
Thanks, Cassie. I appreciate you coming prepared. Look, I value you as an employee and you're a great asset to the team. However, I do need to consider the potential impact on music lessons and the team dynamic with this change.
I understand your concerns, Stuart. I've considered that too, and I'm open to discussing alternative solutions. Perhaps I could look to make alternative arrangements for my daughter on a Wednesday, as there are after school clubs on that day. Or I might be able to still attend on a Friday rather than a Wednesday if the reduced hours could work.
Well, that's definitely something we can explore further. We could also look to see whether we could operate the change for a trial period to see how it worked. I also want to ensure that this change aligns with the school's flexible working policy and procedures and any other decisions that have been made in other departments.
Absolutely. I've reviewed the policy and believe my request complies with it and is similar to other requests which have been granted.
Right, well, Cassie, I appreciate you bringing this up and presenting a really well thought out proposal. I need a little bit of time to review your request in detail and discuss it with other team members and the school's HR officer. However, I promise to get back to you as soon as possible. I know that we must get this resolved within 2 months of your application.
That's great, Stuart. Thank you for considering my proposal and for being open to discussing it further. I really look forward to hearing from you soon.
Thanks, Cassie. We'll be in touch. Okay, that's the end of the second scene. So if you want to drop a comment and say whether you thought that was the good employer or the bad employer, or what you thought about the request and how the employers dealt with it. Ruth has joined us as well, and I think Anna's going to join us to see whether there are any comments about those scenes.
Thank you. Yes, we did have a couple of comments. So on the first scene, someone said that the employer was not acting appropriately. And we also had a comment on that one that the employer should start by asking Stuart, not telling him. And then on the second scene, people thought it was the good employer. There's been a couple of comments that, yeah, there's a suspicion it's the good employer. So are they correct?
Yeah, I think the first one was perhaps a lesson in how not to, although I suspect there are lots of employers out there who may well approach it like that in terms of I'm too busy, I can't deal with this and what have you. But there were several things in there where things like citing how little time the person had been employed there. So it's not going to matter from the 6th of April. There was the fact that other decisions had been made about other people and granting them flexible working maybe, and not granting this person flexible working. Potentially unfair, but potentially discriminatory if one's a male and one's a female. So there were things in that first one. The second one, yes, that's the better employer. And I think more in line with how we hoped employers would deal with it, talking about it, trying to come up with solutions and being flexible as well.
Yeah, and we had another comment from Marie who said she really liked the bit where the employer said, I know you don't have to explain the impact of your request, but if you wouldn't mind, and thought that was a good way of kind of getting the whole picture from the employee.
So we hope those have just been useful to people, just in terms of thinking about those two scenarios, and give people an idea about what maybe a good employer should do and what a bad employer do, and give people some tips about how they approach meetings as well.
Great. So, Anna, do you want to start the slides and then we can go into our presentation?
I will. I'm just going to introduce myself as well briefly. So I'm Anna Inaldina-Ilov. I'm the other co-founder and co-CEO of PiPA. And I'm a white woman in her 40s. I'm wearing glasses today. I've got dark hair that's put up, and I'm wearing a reddish patterned shirt. And I'll start our presentation. Just give me a minute. Right, you should have the presentation now.
Perfect. So in our very first survey into the performing arts workforce, we found that 89% of respondents with and without caring responsibilities agreed that flexible working arrangements would be of benefit to everyone, regardless of caring responsibilities. And since then, research has shown time and time again that flexible working is one of the key practices to enable career progression. And for those with caring responsibilities, career continuation, as it's a key driver for better work-life balance for everyone. A 2022 CIPD report highlighted that employees consider opportunities for flexible working and remote working. 53% of respondents consider it to be key when considering a new job. Furthermore, employers report that hybrid working enables them to recruit from a more diverse talent pool and a wider geographical area. You know that obviously at Parents and Carers in Performing Arts, we have people all over the UK. The pandemic has triggered a huge shift among young people, so people between 18 and 34 who no longer want the traditional 9-to-5 job or even longer hours if you work in our industry. So it's really good for developing your pipeline. And in terms of talent retention, research last year from CIPD suggests that an estimated 4 million people have changed careers due to a lack of flexible working options. So if you're not offering it, there will be somebody else who is offering it. UK Music's 2022 diversity report found that whilst more young women are entering the industry at an early stage, they're leaving industry in their 30s. Flexible working arrangements are pivotal for being able to continue to work and develop as professionals, especially women who become parents or carers. There is also a financial return on investment. We recently at PiPA conducted an exercise around the cost of recruitment, and we figured it to be around £15,000 for one role for us, a small organisation. But actually, when you consider the gap that is left when a valued employee walks away with all their skills and talent and knowledge, it's more like £30,000. Studies have been done that demonstrate that the money invested in making a role flexible is recouped surprisingly quickly through reduced staff absence and recruitment. Finally, from me, having clear processes and policies in place to communicate options for flexibility will help to promote equality across your organisation. Our research has highlighted repeatedly that what we find is people with more seniority in organisations have more autonomy and leverage around the way that they work and their working hours. So what that means is that without a clear and well-communicated flexible working offer for all, access to much needed flex is likely to be inaccessible to those who need it most or who have more insecure roles or are not at such a high level in the organisation. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you. So what was really interesting, just listening to Cassie and Stuart talking about these requests is that we're actually talking about different types of flexible working. And I thought like what would be really useful is to look at what actually flexible working is and how we can make it work. So to sum it up, in essence, flexible working simply means that a job is not done necessarily within the business hours, so what used to be Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, or within the business premises. It is actually trying to align the preferences and need of the person who works for the organization with the organization's needs. So what flexible working doesn't necessarily mean is working less or being unpredictable or coming in and out when you want. There are actually many different types of flexible working, and I just want to talk you briefly through them because I think it might be good to have them in mind and thinking through them when you ask for adjustments of the way that you work. So to start with, the most commonly known form of flexible working is part-time working, which basically means working less than full-time hours. So usually that means fewer days in the week. So rather than working, in the example before, Monday to Fridays, you might only work, I don't know, Monday to Wednesday. Or you work fewer hours, so shorter weeks, fewer hours. So you could still work Monday to Friday, but actually just a part of the day. And the next one is job shares. So this is where one role is split or shared, usually between two people, and this could be again split within a week. So one person working, for example, Monday to Wednesday, and the other person working Thursday till Saturday. Or it could mean that certain performances or certain tour dates are actually covered by one musician and the rest by another. And for musicians, this quite often actually happens when they're depping. And then, of course, there's remote working, which we all know too well from COVID times. And many people actually forget that remote working also falls under the flexible working umbrella. And it basically means working outside of the organization's building, some or all of the time. And this could be as simple as joining certain meetings remotely, or even sending emails or show reports or any other documents from home or whilst away, maybe on tour. Then we've got compressed hours, and this is where the full-time hours are actually condensed into a shorter week. So if you would work full-time Monday to Friday, let's say it's 37 hours, you would still work 37 hours, but it would be in a shorter compressed time. So it might be that you're just working that from Monday till Thursday. And in comparison to part-time working or to job share, here the actual workload is not being adjusted or being reduced. Then there's annualized hours. So this is where how much you work is expressed as a total number of hours that are worked during the course of a year. But the hours that you actually work are likely to fluctuate from maybe week to week or even from month to month, meaning maybe this month you're really busy with performances and rehearsals, but next month might be really quiet. But the way it's being shown is over a year of how much you work in total over the year. Then there is core hours and flexi time. And this is where the start and finishing times might vary. And that's within obviously agreed limits, but where specific work core hours are agreed for everyone. For example, everybody would need to be there from 10 till 3 o'clock every day. But some people might start earlier, for example, 8 o'clock, or leave much later, let's say 9 o'clock in the evening. And this confining core hours really helps when you got a predominantly flexible working team in order to schedule meetings, for example, or rehearsals to schedule around. And then there is shifts or shift work, and they're really designed to make use or provide services during key times of each day of the week. So you typically see a day divided into set periods of time during which different groups of workers then perform their duties. So a classic example is in tech. We often have shift where someone does the morning shift, where you might have maintenance or rehearsals, and then someone else does the evening shift, where maybe there's the actual performance that's taking place. But who does which shift might change or vary throughout the weeks or the months. So essentially, all these types of flexible working boil down to 3 categories. So when you're trying to find flexibility, it's always useful to assess a job through these 3 lenses. Where is about identifying which aspect of a role can be delivered offsite and how to make this work best for the person who's obviously delivering the role, as well as the organization. And this is, of course, where remote working often comes into play. Then we've got when, and that's looking specifically at the times or the patterns that we work. So that's where compressed hours come into play, or the flexi time, where you've got the core hours, but you have different start and finishing times, or maybe where you work different patterns in the week or in the month. And then there is how much. And this is where we are looking at adjusting a role and the workload that comes with it. So that's where part-time work falls into, and job splits or job sharing, where the role might remain full-time for the organization, but 2 or more people split the time and share these responsibilities. So these 3 questions can really help you find the most suitable form of flexibility for your circumstance. And that could then also work within or for the employer's need. And if you break it down like this, you'll find that most roles actually have got some opportunity for flexibility. But let's go a little bit deeper, because often there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, and a bit of thinking outside the box might be required. And we've heard that in the second scenario with Stuart and Cassie, actually, where there was a little bit of discussions of what form of flexibility might suit best for the employer and the employee. So it's really helpful to break a role down into all of its components to see how and where the flexibility can be found. And this is where the job design comes in. So here are some of the considerations that might be helpful to think through as a manager, or even as the person who's looking for flexibility, because being armed with the knowledge and some of solutions can really help move the process forward. So for all of this, you need to know what the basic requirements for the role are. What are the non-negotiables? What are within the conditions of the role? And where does it sit within, where does the role sit within the wider organization or team? So to start with, you look at the role outline itself. What are the key deliverables of the role? What are the essential requirements? For example, do you need to be performing at a specific venue or delivering a class maybe at this date or to these students? And where's the potential to review the actual design of the role? Then consider how this role might sit within the team, or where it collaborates with others. What's the current structure of the department? Is this role a part of a team, and what is the size of the team? Is it just one other person, or is there maybe a whole section of an orchestra to consider alongside? Does this role manage somebody? And if so, once you bring in some flexibility, how will that work? And also, who do they report to? And again, how could that be adjusted, maybe in terms of how they report or when they report? Is there maybe scope to delegate parts of this role, especially if there is a team involved or a bigger department? Who could support or take on certain aspects of that role, or maybe even take tasks from that role to share? And then we can look at the time requirements. We just spoke about a bit earlier of the role and how many hours, so you start with how many hours the current role contract has. And then again, what are the core hours and where could there be flexibility? Could some aspects of the role be covered differently to allow maybe a different start or finishing time, or or maybe a completely different structure that would work throughout the week. And of course, do assess the necessity of being on site. Where do the different types of activities of this role actually need to take place? Which aspects need to be delivered on site, and which aspects of the role can be performed from somewhere else? So once you go through the role with the fine comb and having all these considerations in mind, you will find that there might be some aspects that are immovable, but there will certainly be others that could be adjusted to bring in some form of flexibility. And that's where the conversation starts to go, this is what we can offer, and this is where we can't offer flexibility right now. So just to think through, and there's something again that Stuart was talking about earlier as well, there often can be a bit of fear or maybe anxiety from managers or employers, which is caused by this uncertainty of how to make it work and how the changing and the flexibility could affect the wider team, or how it would work within the existing structures. So in order to make it work and to find flexibility, there are two key tools. One is regular open communication, which was really well modeled, obviously, in the second scenario. But something that we always advocate for with the organizations that we work with and support is trials. So rather than changing a contract immediately, it might be really useful to trial a solution out for a specific time. So this means that there's no immediate change to a contract right now that needs to be made. And it gives the person needing the flexibility, as well as the organization, the opportunity to find out what works and what doesn't work before agreeing and embedding the right structure. Many organizations that we work with, they trial solutions and new ways of working before they actually find the right structure to then implement organization-wide. So this is a really useful tool. And in order to set up a trial, what you need to do is you need to agree the parameters and the expectations of what you want to achieve and what you want to do in that trial. What are the adjustments that you're trying out? You need to set a time frame for the trial, so you know how long you're going to be trialing it. And obviously at the end, you need to conduct a review to see what worked and what didn't work. But what we also say is have check-in points in between, so maybe you can already adjust or see how things are going. At the very end of the review, you can then decide basically if you find the right way to then implement as a permanent change, for example, or if you might need another trial in order to adjust or bring in new ways of working for the person or for the organization. Cassie.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anna. I love so many practical suggestions. If people have got any questions, or Anna, I know that you and your team have worked up, a lot of resources around taking organizations through this process. So if anybody has any questions or would like to know more, you can email us at programs@pipacampaign.com. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce Rowan Rutter, CEO of City of London Sinfonia, who has done a fantastic pre-record for our employer case study.
Hello, my name is Rowan Rutter. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, CEO of City of London Sinfonia, also known as CLS. We're a chamber orchestra based in the City of London, and we tour across the country and internationally as well. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be with you in person today. I'd really have liked to have been. Whilst you're watching this, I will be in a board meeting, our Q4 board meeting, and my first year end at the company, because I only started here last April. I am a white woman. I'm in my mid-30s. I have short blonde hair, and I'm wearing a green jumper. And my pronouns are she, her. So Cassie asked me to just talk a little bit about parenting and flexibility and the things that we make possible at our company. I think the first thing for me to say is that I am a parent. My son is 2.5 years old, I also parent in a same-sex marriage, same-sex relationship, and that brings a different angle and view to some things, I think, and a different kind of understanding of what the work-life balance of two parents who are also of the same gender in the world present and occupy and experience in their feelings around how they parent and how other people perceive them to parent. So we don't have a kind of traditional, she does this, he does that, which I know I'm sure many of you don't, but I think when we're talking about sort of breaking down historical structures within HR and organisations, that's often something that you're trying to navigate. So the first point I wanted to think about really is how we have integrated an understanding of flexibility in the company. And I would want to say from the outset actually that this flexibility applies to everybody within whatever the situation is that they are dealing with in their lives, whether that is the ongoing joy and sometimes challenge of being a parent, whether it's the challenge of being a carer or a support worker in any way, but also people who are just dealing with other aspects of their own self and their humanness, whether that's their mental health or supporting a loved one, or just the way in which they work best. I'm someone who works best at 6 o'clock in the morning, and that's me, and I don't need to impose that on anybody else, but I also want to feel empowered to be able to do that. So as a leader, my idea is to be able to put in place as much flexibility as possible and as works for the organisation to enable everybody to work and be their best self. So when I got to the company just coming up a year ago, the maternity, paternity, the parental, well, I renamed it parental policy, was really out of date. And I did some research working with other chamber orchestras and sort of looked at what they offered, and I updated the offer in line with what at that point felt financially viable. And I would just say that at that point we had 3 staff members who were already on maternity leave and 2 more who were due to go on maternity leave. And the changes that I made to the policy, I did apply to those who were already on leave and created some back pay for them on what was then an enhanced maternity policy that I put in place. So we now have 12 weeks of full pay, 4 weeks of 50% pay, and then go down to statutory. I have agreed with our board that we will revisit that next year, and I hope very much to be able to improve that again. We are an all-female identifying team. That's not necessarily by agenda of the organisation. It is simply how it's fallen out at this point. But I do think that creates a different kind of understanding, perhaps potentially, among the staff team about what we might think of as the administrative additionals in a life that we're carrying with us. I think 4 of us are parents, I apologise. And we have members on our staff who are interested in becoming parents, and others who have declared that they are not. And that is not because I have broken HR protocol and asked them, it is because we talk about this stuff a lot as a staff team. We talk about how different aspects of our lives impact each other and how we can support each other and how we can create a working environment that is absolutely professional, but also gives some leniency and bounds to people who need a little bit more support, a little bit more space in their day. So, as I say, the first thing that I did was change the policy, which is a really sort of bureaucratic, logistical thing to do, and maybe feels like that's quite a bureaucratic place to start, but it's really important because it draws a legal line in the sand and says this is who we are. And then in terms of how we integrate that flexibility, we have quite a small staff team, so there's 10 of us. But the strange and glorious thing about an orchestra is that you also have this enormous body of freelancers. So there's 45 players, then there's our orchestral team who help us to deliver all of our projects and our concerts. Then on top of that, you also have quite a an extensive additional support team around library, orchestral fixing, what else? We also have an external bookkeeper. So there's a lot of different layers there. So we've got our core employee team, and then we have an army really of freelancers. And so when it comes to supporting those freelancers, we abide by the MU, the Musicians Union, and the ABO, the Association of British Orchestras, but we also add additional support to our parents on parental leave, and we guarantee them that their position in the orchestra will be safe. And I know that sounds like a very strange thing to say, but that's a very new and recent change, positive change in the orchestral world, that players are guaranteed that their seat will still be there when they come back, and that's really important. But again, supporting that many freelancers with maternity pay is not something, I'm going to be completely transparent, it's not something that we have the capacity to do right now, but it's one of the things that I have started talking to our leader about, our orchestral leader, who's also our creative director, who is also female identifying and is also a parent, about how we can start to put together a package of support for parents in their freelance capacity, and what that could look like. I don't know, come back to me in a year maybe, and I'll have a bit more to say about that, but it's a very live conversation, and I think it's really important in all of this to say, yes, here are the successes and here are the things we have done, but here are the nuts we haven't yet cracked, and we're really trying to think about those. I think in terms of how the flexibility is integrating the impact of that, and again, this is different sizes and scales of organisations will have to do this differently, but it's very, very personal. And I start from a position of trusting the staff team. I trust what they do. I trust their work ethic, and that's trust that they have earned from me. But I also start from I always start from a position of trusting everybody, and then if there is any need to question that, then we go from there. But I know, for instance, that my staff, or they're not mine, please excuse the possessive pronoun, the staff of City of London Sinfonia are incredibly aware of their time and their dedication to the organisation. And if they say to their line manager, I think I need 4 hours of toil, or I'm going to start later and end earlier, or whatever that is that it looks like in that week, then that's for a genuine reason. And that genuine reason is usually about getting the best out of themselves, and then recognising that they need this in order to be their best working professional self. And so we trust that. And I haven't yet had a situation where I've felt like that has been taken advantage of, or that anybody was doing anything that they shouldn't have been doing in that work time. And it's not a perfect answer, trust, but that's essentially what it comes down to. People need to start work later because that's when they work better, irrespective of if they're a parent. Then great, work 12 till 9 if that's your preferred hours. If you need to leave to pick up your child, understand, go and pick up your child. Why would I, as an employer, put obstacles in the way for people to be their best selves? That just creates a bad feeling amongst everybody, and everybody constantly feels like they're under pressure, and that work becomes a thing that is sort of sitting on their shoulder, and is not a joyful communal professional experience, which is what I believe it should be. So within that, I guess you get a sense of my leadership, which is about very open door, about trust, and also I lead by example. I leave to pick up my child. I also choose to then log back on later in the evening and pick up some emails and do some things, but also I'm the chief executive. I am paid to do that. I don't take as much toil as everybody else. I lead by that kind of example, but I also I make sure everybody goes home safe. Everyone's in a taxi if they're leaving after hours. People are followed up with. There is we have brought in coaching to work with some of our senior staff around some of these issues. We have monthly staff meetings where we just talk. We have a kind of emotional hour, and it's very important that we sort of put some boundaries around that, but it's very specifically to bring up anything that you're feeling challenged with emotionally at work. It's not personal, and obviously that has to be very carefully held. But I just think it's really important to give people the space and the ability to be their best selves. And the only way that I know how to do that is to model it on myself, and to be kind and to be gracious, to have very clear boundaries, and to create a work environment that people want to be in, and that supports and champions and celebrates the diversity of the human experience, whether that's as a mother, a father, a carer, a sister, a brother, a partner, a friend. All of those things matter, and all of those things come with responsibility, and we want to enable those responsibilities, give space to them to support our employees to the best of their ability. Thanks so much. I hope to be with you in person sometime soon.
Well, thank you, everybody. So it just leaves us to finish up with the webinar. I'm afraid we don't have time for Q&A today, as we've run out of time. But I would just like to thank very much our presenters. So thank you to Cassie, thank you to Stuart, and thank you to Anna, as well as Rowan. And also to say thank you all to you for joining us today. It was a really extremely useful overview of flexible working for parents and carers in music, and I hope you found the session informative. If you have any further questions, please do email us on inquiries@ismtrust.org, and please do fill in our post-webinar survey, which you can find in the chat. And this will also be emailed out to you afterwards. We really appreciate your feedback. As I said at the beginning of the webinar, it helps us to improve our services and to offer you more free professional development in the future. So the webinar recording will be sent out to you by email, and it will be available to watch back on our website. And we'll also send you some useful links that we've shared during this webinar. And just to note that our next ISM Trust event is our second music and deafness webinar in our series, and that will be on reaching and engaging deaf people in music making activities on the 26th of March. We've also just launched a new resource called Breaking the Singing Barrier, and that includes 4 webinars on exploring and overcoming barriers to singing in schools. And that series begins on the 17th of April and it runs through to the 15th of May. So finally, can I just thank you all again for watching, and we hope to see you at another ISM Trust event soon. Thank you very much. Goodbye.